or formal education or instruction where the learner or a person would have to be guided for them to be aware that they should learn that language. For example, in a classroom situation, the teacher could be teaching about grammatical rules. Now, the first hypothesis that I'll be talking about is the acquisition hypothesis. According to Krashen, people acquire language without being aware, which is the subconscious. Now, in second language acquisition, learners can acquire it through oral or written. Oral in being the interaction between one peer to the other or to the person who speaks that target language. And in written form, in a classroom situation, the teacher can bring maybe a story and read the learners a story in that target language. Now, acquisition requires a meaningful interaction. Meaningful meaning using real situations. Like maybe a teacher in class can make a scenario and tell the learners to act out the scenario using that target language. The LTSM that the teacher can also use can be in a form of, maybe the teacher can bring movies in the target language. The learner might not understand fully the language, but they can deduce some meaning, especially if they are still in the acquiring process. Moving on to the second hypothesis, which is the monitor hypothesis. This hypothesis explains the difference between learning and acquisition. Now, monitoring is the actual result of something learned, which is grammar in this sense. Now, according to Krashen, for this hypothesis to be successfully used in the classroom, the learner should focus more on being accurate or being correct, like maybe saying a word in a correct form. Now, it is going to be difficult for the learner to be focused on both things, which they should be accurate as well as fluent. Now, for the teacher to help the learner to create a balance between the two, the teacher has to encourage that the learner should be fluent as well as accurate in the language. But now, for this hypothesis to be implemented successfully, the teacher has to make sure that they apply it in the right way. Like, for example, the monitoring hypothesis is best applied when the teacher has given the learner something to write, so that maybe the learner has time to plan on how to write. Maybe the learner might be writing an essay on something. But now, in a communicative exercise or activity, then the teacher will rather focus on fluency. The third one is the natural order hypothesis. Now, according to Krashen, the English language is the most studied language across, and this is because most of its morphology and the other structures that are in the language. And now, some of these structures are learned at an earlier stage, and the others are learned at a later stage. Now, this hypothesis suggests that people acquire them independently, without being taught, without being guided, which means they just pick up some structures. They just pick up that, no, this is how you're supposed to say this, or this is how this word is written. Now, in a classroom situation, the teacher should be aware of which structures the learner already know, or which the learner already are aware of. And then, in this sense, in application, the teacher can use the scaffolding method to start by focusing on, or rather starting on, the more easier ones and moving on to the more complex structures of language. And the rest of the hypothesis.
The third hypothesis will be the input. also called the comprehensive. And then in this one, Krashen suggests that the input should be, the one who teaches should be one step ahead from the learner's current language acquisition. So that it should be one step all the time so that the learners do not get bored when we are busy teaching them. And then in a classroom situation, the goal of language is to program learners so that they can be able to communicate effectively. If you teach them language and then they're still unable to communicate effectively, that means you are not doing your job. Teachers should provide as much input as possible, especially in a situation where learners are not exposed to the target language. So the next input, the next hypothesis is a filter hypothesis. So the filter one talks about the understandability of messages. So if you are sitting and then messages do not come through the way you want it to. And this hypothesis works in three ways. There's anxiety, self-conscious, and motivation. If those three are at a low, the learners will not learn. So two of them, they should be at the high, one should be at the low, to motivate them to want to learn. If all of them, they're at the low, learners tend to be bored. I'm sure you've seen on a situation where you try to lead a story to them, and then learners lose focus, they don't focus too. That means they have lost the interest of what you are trying to do. So, as a teacher, you should always create an environment where learners they can communicate with you very well. The other thing Krashen says is language acquisition. As teachers, we are quick to correct learners. So learners should not be corrected if the motive or the objective is acquisition, but only correct them when it's learning. The other hypothesis that we have is learning. It's reading. So in reading, I think it's one of the hypotheses that Krashen should have put there, because you cannot gain acquisition of language only by being taught. You also have to do that. I mean, take a look at the 3 years that we've been here and the books that have asked you to read. How many vocabulary have you learned from that? So, as a teacher, you must always make sure that your learners are involved in a situation like this. They read more and they consult more so that they might be able to know what is important in a grammatical language. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You can sit down now.
Next.